I have to say that I have listened carefully to the previous speeches, and I have listened to many speeches on the same subject over many years, and the usual cliches used to be trotted out always, too little, too late. Somebody resurrected it again with some encouragement, I think, in the last few days. Too little, too late. Opportunities lost. It's a fable now. Opportunities lost. Could have done more. Didn't do it. Failure. All of those have been trotted out at various times in the past. But I have to say this, that I think the budget is an excellent budget. It does what it needed to do now to address the issues that are pertinent, that are pressing the people at this particular stage, that are affecting the people's livelihoods, their cost of living and their families. And it does something. It doesn't resolve everything. No budget ever did. There were always people around who were saying, well, you could have done more and you should have done more, and if we were there, we'd have done more. But the important thing about that is this: the we usually is in the opposition, and they would always do more until they get the chance to do it, and then there was something missing. I don't know what it was, but it was missing. So I think that all credit is due to the ministers for their presentation, for the manner in which they went about addressing the issues that are pertinent, as I say, and pressing now. And it goes from education, in terms of school transport, in respect to pupil-teacher ratio, and I know there are some outstanding issues on the school transport system, and I've raised it a few times, and hopefully that can be resolved, particularly the concessionary students, their issues can be resolved relatively easily. I want to mention briefly that this was made possible. This was made possible because the country was run well for the past 2.5 years, and even in difficult circumstances, in the face of an international and national economic crash before that. If this country had not stood its ground then in 28, 9 and 10 and 11, if this country hadn't stood its ground, faced its responsibilities, we wouldn't be able to do anything now. It wouldn't be possible. We'd be still looking around with begging bowls, and it couldn't happen. And I remember hearing people saying a couple of years ago that there was that money should not be put into what became the rainy day fund, on the basis that it was raining heavily outside at the present time. Well, if the precautions hadn't been taken then, again we wouldn't have the independence now. We wouldn't be able to do the things that needed to be done, because there's always that unforeseen threat coming down the road, and that remains still and may well be on into the future. And as I remember, I was on the committee along with the now Minister for Energy back in 2007, I think it was 6, 7, 8, when the energy industry was being reviewed, and rightly so. The European Union was attempting to create an international grid in such a way that there would be some electricity at all times readily available and generated, and that Europe would eventually be independent in terms of energy production. And it didn't happen for a whole lot of reasons. We failed in this country to deliver it. I remember when I won't mention the name, but an announcement was made to the effect that we had sufficient energy, surplus energy, for the foreseeable future, and that there was nothing to worry about. But of course, he was talking against the background of a country that was on its knees with the economic recession. And of course, that prediction was completely and absolutely wrong. So I think that at the time, EirGrid should have looked very much more carefully at the situation that presented itself, and with good effect. We also had, of course, the other one, the issue in relation to wind-generated electricity. And I hear the argument that still continues to this day about offshore. Offshore means get it away from me so that I don't have to put up with it. That's what that means. And I have to say this, I would warn against too much reliance at this stage on the offshore, because it requires about 10 years, at least 10 years of investment, heavy investment, that we don't have at the moment, hasn't been put in place at the moment. So that means that we have to import it, and we produce more onshore. There are still some places that we can produce more onshore. But then we had other interruptions, like, for instance, undergrounding of all cables. And I remember going to Italy some years ago and looking at all the cables all over the place, up the side of mountains and so on and so forth. So it was good enough for there, but we were going to go underground, the same as the Netherlands. There's somewhat of a difference in the terrain in the Netherlands and here, and digging into rock formations and so on and so forth takes a lot more ingenuity than just driving across a level plain. So I have to say this, that there's a lot to be done there that needs to be done yet with some urgency. And there's no use waiting for the lights to go out to take the means that's available and within reach and put it into operation. So I would say that that's an area that we need to focus on in the future, and I agree with my colleagues when they say that the time will come eventually, hopefully, when electricity can heat the homes, and good insulation, good energy conservation will do the rest. That combination is good. And incidentally, I hear about, it is expensive to retrofit houses and so on. So it's not easy by a long shot. The biggest single contribution that can be made is double or treble glazing in terms of doors and windows. Completely eliminates two things. It eliminates the escape of heat and noise for those who live in areas where they're concerned about noise, near motorways or whatever the case may be, or airports either for that matter. But it's an issue that can be dealt with and needs to be dealt with in a more focused way. In other words, we need to look at it as to see how and when we can produce the end result, as opposed to saying, well, look, we have it in an idea, we have it already up and running. It's going to be done by offshore investment. It's not, is the answer to that. It's not there, but it needs to be looked at in a meaningful way. I want to say as well that I couldn't make this contribution without making a mention of housing. Housing still remains to be done in an even more meaningful way than it has been done. It's a huge challenge. It has been a huge challenge 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 27 years ago. At Cathaoirleach, I predicted that housing would be the biggest single challenge facing the country in the next 20 years. Guys laughed at me, in this House as well, and outside this House. But I was right. And I make the next prediction now. Sadly, I believe that a food shortage will be the next crisis that hits the globe, along with the other challenges, military challenges that we see at the moment. And that's why we have to balance, and this is not, I'm not chiding my colleagues from the Green Party, we have to challenge those who suggest that we can afford to reduce our food producing capacity in this country and at the same time survive. We're not going to. It doesn't work that way. We have to provide food we provide food in this country for about 50 million people at the moment. That's 50 million people. So the knock-on effect of that, if it increases, is that 50 million people who are barely vulnerable now or barely affected now will be affected in any food shortage in the future. And it will come rapidly and it will be severe. So we can think about that, because it's a fact. So in the time involved, I would just say this, that I think it's a tremendous budget, addresses the issues as they need to be addressed now, and not overdoing it, but holding something in reserve in the event that we have to go again. But the bit that I have to laugh about is this, is the budget hasn't gone through the House yet, and already we have some commentators marking on the fact that, will there be a mini-budget? They don't seem to look across the water to see the result of a mini-budget over there, and all the resources that they have, and how quickly the tide can turn into a crisis. So we need to talk very carefully. So I think and act carefully and in a structured way. And I think that's what has been done. So suffice it to say that housing remains, health remains, and we're not underspending on health, incidentally. 22 billion is a fair spend. It's a lot of money, and it takes a lot of getting. And so we have to organise it more efficiently than we've had in the past, and try to ensure that we make the changes that are necessary long before they become a crisis. in order to be able to cater for the demands as they are likely to arise in the future. And I think that would be my humble suggestion in that area. And I know that the Minister is conscious of that, and that the government is conscious of that. And I'll finish on the last few seconds in relation to housing. I said those years ago that there was a necessity for an emergency housing programme. I still think that's the case. Even though there's been success, I think it isn't sufficient to get ahead of where we have to be. Remember, if there are 100,000 people on, for instance, housing waiting lists of all descriptions, public and private, in a given year, by the time we get to resolving that, it'll be 200,000 if we don't make massive changes. So we have to cater for asylum seekers, and rightly we have to do so, and we have to cater for our own Indigenous population. Between them, I think we need to address it in an extra special way, and that's my suggestion. So I would say thank you very much, Cathaoirleach.